I paid my parents $700 every single week, same day, same hour. I told myself it was for peace, for family. Then they skipped my child's birthday. No call, no excuse. When I finally asked why, my father said something that split me open from the inside out. He said my child meant nothing to them. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even breathe right. My hands were shaking as I opened my phone and started cutting them off one payment at a time. 40 minutes later, they noticed. And that's when everything truly began to fall apart. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing someone is on the other side of the screen makes it possible to keep going. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If stories about family boundaries and choosing your child resonate with you, invite you to subscribe to this channel. This space is for honest stories we don't always say out loud, the kind father to tell but matter to hear. My name is Rowan, and this is the story of how I stopped paying for peace and finally learned what family really means. Every Monday at exactly 9 in the morning, I did the same thing. It didn't matter if I had just come off a 10-hour night shift, if my eyes were burning from exhaustion, or if my hands still smelled faintly of cardboard and machine oil. At 9 a.m. sharp, I opened my banking app, typed in the familiar numbers, and sent $700 to my parents. I'm 32 years old. I'm a single father. I work nights at a distribution center outside Missoula, Montana, moving freight while most of the city sleeps. By the time the sun comes up, my body feels hollowed out like something has been scraped clean inside. Emmy. Still, that transfer never failed. Not once in 8 months. I told myself it was responsibility. I told myself it was family. The truth sat somewhere uglier in between. It wasn't generosity and it wasn't love. It was a habit built from fear, guilt, and the quiet hope that if I did enough, gave enough, stayed agreeable enough, something broken might eventually fix itself. My parents lived just over 30 minutes away. Close enough that distance couldn't be blamed, far enough that silence could be justified. We spoke rarely, and when we did, it felt less like conversation and more like a transaction. My mother's voice was always efficient. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about my son. She listed needs. Groceries were getting expensive. The power bill was higher this month. Your father's medication is running low. There was never a thank you at the end of those calls. Just an expectation that I understood what was required of me. My father barely spoke at all. When he did, it was short and final, as if words were a limited resource he refused to waste. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His silence did most of the work. It reminded me who had authority and who was expected to adapt. So, I adapted. He always had. I learned how to phrase things carefully, how to avoid subjects that might irritate them, how to apologize even when I wasn't sure what I'd done wrong. Keeping them calm felt like the price of staying connected, and I paid it without complaint. At least I thought I did. My son is 6 years old. He's quiet in the way thoughtful kids often are, observant and sensitive, always watching faces a little too closely. He asks questions that don't have easy answers. Questions about why other kids get picked up by grandparents. Questions about why his don't come to school events. Questions he learned to redirect before they went anywhere dangerous. I told him his grandparents lived far away. I told him they were busy. I told him they weren't feeling well. I said it with a steady voice, like it was nothing, like I wasn't rearranging reality to protect both of us. Sometimes I believed my own lies. Sometimes I needed to. After night shifts, I'd sit at the kitchen table while he slept, scrolling through bills and schedules, watching the confirmation message from the bank blink on my screen. Payment sent. It felt less like a relief and more like survival. As long as I kept things running, nothing would explode. But $700 was only the visible part of it. I was also paying their rent, their utilities, their prescriptions. When their car broke down, I covered the repair before they even asked. Everything was in my name, everything tied back to me. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being their son and became their safety net, their buffer against consequences. I didn't call it that at first. I told myself families help each other. I told myself this way's temporary. I told myself it was easier this way. By the end of that 8th month, though, a thought crept in that I couldn't fully push away anymore. I wasn't just supporting my parents. I was sustaining them. And the cost wasn't only financial. Things hadn't always been this way. Or at least that's what I like to believe. After my divorce, when it became clear I would be raising my son alone, my parents didn't argue. They didn't disapprove out loud. They did something quieter and far more effective. They withdrew. Phone calls became shorter. Visits stopped. My son's name faded from conversations until it disappeared clean. If I mentioned him, there was a pause, an awkward shift, then a change of subject. It was subtle enough that I could pretend it meant nothing. That was when the money started. Small amounts at first, just helping out, just easing the strain. I told myself it was normal that I was stepping up because I was capable. The requests were never explicit. No one said, "You owe us." They didn't have to. Instead, they created a space where the responsibility felt obvious, where stopping would mean choosing conflict, where pulling back would brand me as ungrateful, selfish, disloyal. I absorbed that pressure without question. I always had. Somewhere along the way, a rule formed in my head, solid and unquestioned. Money meant peace. Peace meant connection. And connection, even thin and fragile, was better than nothing. What I didn't let myself examine was what I was getting in return. They never asked about my son, not once. They didn't know his birthday. They never asked for photos. Never asked how school was going. Never asked what he liked or what made him laugh. 8 months went by and his existence never crossed their lips. I noticed it. Of course I did. But I told myself acceptance took time. I told myself that if I kept showing up, kept proving I was responsible, reliable, useful, they would eventually come around. I just had to try harder. My son spent a lot of time drawing. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his crayons tongue caught between his teeth in concentration and draw families. Always families. Adults holding hands, a small child in the middle, everyone smiling. I taped those drawings to the fridge. I told myself I was proud of him. In truth, I was clinging to them like evidence that things were still okay, like proof that my silence hadn't hurt him yet. But guilt has a way of finding cracks. One afternoon, I overheard a neighbor mention my parents in passing, laughing about something they'd said. They don't even have grandkids. She told Mike it was a harmless comment. I smiled. I nodded. I said nothing. Inside, something shifted. Not enough to break, but enough to sting. I explained it away immediately. People misspeak. Older generations phrase things oddly. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't. Still, the idea lingered. The possibility that this wasn't ignorance or distance, but denial. That they weren't waiting to accept my son. They were choosing not to. That was when I decided to plan his birthday. Not something small, not something quiet. I planned it carefully, deliberately. Decorations, a cake, a little inflatable I found. Secondhand. I told my parents weeks in advance. I didn't beg. I didn't pressure. I just gave them the information and waited. I told myself it was for my son, that he deserved a good day. But underneath that was a deeper reason I didn't want to admit yet. This was a test, a final one. a moment where they would either show up or confirm what I'd been avoiding for months. I didn't know then that I already had my answer. I just didn't know how much it was going to cost me to hear it. I planned my son's birthday the way you plan something when you're afraid it might be the last time it matters. I chose a Saturday because weekends are easier to justify. People don't have work. There are fewer excuses. I marked the date on the calendar weeks in advance. Circled it once, then twice a see for repetition could make it real. I didn't tell myself why I was doing that. I just did it. I cleaned the backyard mice after coming home from night shifts, dragging leaves into piles while the air was still cold. In the early morning, I hung streamers along the fence, adjusting them until they looked straight enough from a distance. I found a used inflatable bounce house online and drove across town to pick it up, folding it into the trunk like something fragile. I bought a cake that wasn't fancy, but looked cheerful enough with bright colors and too much frosting. It told my parents about the party early, not the week before, not the day before. I told them nearly a month ahead. I gave them the address, the time, and the reason. I didn't ask if they were coming. I told them when it was happening and waited for the acknowledgement that never came. As the day got closer, two feelings lived city beside inside me. One was hope, stubborn and quiet, refusing to disappear. The other was a heavy certainty I tried not to name. I rehearsed explanations in my head just in case. Things I could say to my son if asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. The morning of the party, I woke up tired but alert, like my body knew something important was coming. My son ran around the house in his socks, excited in a contained way, checking the window every few minutes. I told him his friends would be here soon. I didn't mention anyone else. People arrived in small clusters. Parents I recognized from school, a few kids from the neighborhood. Laughter filled the yard, and for a while it almost worked. I smiled when I was supposed to. I handed out drinks. I took pictures. I kept one eye on the gate. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened. Every time it stayed silent, something inside me sank lower. No call, no explanation, no delay message blaming traffic or weather. Just nothing. The only message came mid-afternoon. A text from my mother. It was short. It didn't mention the party. It didn't mention coming. It said to tell my son happy birthday for him. That was all. I read it once. Then again, I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket before my son could see my face. I didn't tell him about the message. I didn't know how to explain a sentence that small, carrying so much absence. As the afternoon wore on, guests began to leave. The bounce house deflated. Paper plates piled up on the table. Myson drifted toward the gate, standing there longer each time. He asked me when his grandparents were coming. His voice softened with every question, like he was already learning how to make disappointment quieter. I kept answering same way. Maybe they're running late. Maybe traffic's bad. Maybe they'll surprise us. By the time the sun dipped low and the yard emptied out, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't distance. This was a decision. Standing there with my son beside me, watching the empty road, I finally admitted what I had been avoiding. They weren't failing to show up. They were choosing not to. That night, after I tucked my son into bed and turned off his light, I sat alone in the living room and stared at my phone. I knew what I had to do next. I knew the call I'd been postponing for months. I also knew that once I made it, there would be no pretending left. I waited until the house was completely quiet. Then I dialed my father's number. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the small lamp over the sink and the glow of the clock on the wall. My son was asleep down the hall. His door cracked open the way he liked it. The house felt hollow, as if everything had paused to watch what I was about to do. I didn't call my father because I wanted an apology. I didn't call because I expected to understand. I called because I needed one reason, just one, to believe that everything I'd been carrying had meant something. He answered on the third ring. His voice was flat and irritated, like I'd interrupted him. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about the party. I asked him why they didn't come. There was a brief pause, just long enough for me to think maybe he was choosing his words. Then he said they didn't feel like it. No explanation followed, no hesitation. Just the statement, clean and final. I told him my son had waited all day. I told him he'd stood at the gate asking when they would arrive. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply said it the way you say something you hope will land. Silence stretched across the line. Not confusion, not regret. Silence heavy with dismissal. In that space, something shifted. He understood then that what I'd been calling distance was something else entirely. When he spoke again, his tone didn't change. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound defensive. He said, "My child meant nothing to them." The words didn't fit all at once. They moved slowly, settling into places I didn't know could go numb. My hands started to shake. Cold crept up my arms. I couldn't focus on the room around me, only on the sound of my own breathing. I didn't argue. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I didn't say anything at all. He hung up. I stayed where I was, phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the counter in front of me. The house wasqued in a way that felt different now, heavier. Somewhere behind me, my son breathed steadily in his sleep, unaware that something fundamental had just broken. This wasn't a family disagreement. This wasn't a misunderstanding or poor communication. This was a deliberate refusal to see my child as real. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there for a long moment, listening to the clock tick. Then I straightened, walked back into the kitchen, and looked at the time. I knew with a clarity that left no room for doubt that whatever I did next would change everything. The house didn't feel different after the call ended. That was strangest part. Nothing shattered. No doors slammed. No voices echoed in my head. The silence simply settled in, heavier than before, like a weight finally allowed to rest. It was late, the kind of late where the world feels reduced to small repetitive sounds. The refrigerator hummed softly. The clock on the wall clicked forward. 1 second at a time. My son slept down the hall, his breathing slow and even unaware that a line had just been crossed that could never be uncrossed. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, not moving. My father's words replayed in my mind, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a dull persistence. At first, they hurt. Then they didn't. Or rather, the pain shifted into something flatter, something clearer. The ache gave way to understanding. Had tried long enough. There was nothing left to prove, no effort left to make, no version of myself that could earn a different outcome. That realization didn't come with relief. It came with stillness. I picked up my phone again, not to call anyone, not to send a message, but to open my banking app. The screen lit up my face in the dim kitchen. I scrolled slow, deliberately through the list of recurring payments. Each one carried my name. Each one carried a piece off responsibility I had quietly accepted over time. Rent, utilities, insurance, prescriptions. I stared at the list and felt something settle into place. They didn't need me as a son. They didn't see me as family. What they needed was consistency, predictability, a steady source of money that asked no questions and required no emotional investment. That clarity stripped away the last layer of confusion. I began canceling the payments one by one. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. Each confirmation felt final but not dramatic. There was no rush of adrenaline, no sense of victory, just the quiet removal of obligations that no longer belonged to me. When I reached the last entry, I stopped. $700 every Monday at 9. I had built my weeks around that moment, my sense of stability around that transfer. It wasn't just money. It was the symbol of everything I had been holding together with my own exhaustion. I paused for a few seconds, letting myself acknowledge the truth, then I canceled it. The confirmation appeared. The habit of 8 months vanished. With a tap, I waited for something to happen inside me. Fear, relief, regret. Nothing came. Only silence. I set the phone down on the counter and leaned against it, listening to the house breathe. Time passed without me noticing how much. Then my phone vibrated. A message from my mother. She asked if I could order them dinner. Nothing fancy, just something simple. They didn't have food in the house. I checked the time. 40 minutes, that was all it took. 40 minutes for the balance to disappear. 40 minutes for my child's birthday to become less important than an empty fridge. I read the message once, then again. I didn't reply. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I walked down the hallway and stopped outside my son's room. His door was half open, exactly how he liked it. A small nightlight spilled a soft glow across his bed. He slept on his side, one hand tucked near his face, completely unaware of the weight pressing on the rest of the house. I stood there longer than necessary, watching his chest rise and fall. Behind me, my phone sat silent. My mother's message waited there, but it felt far away now, like it belonged to someone else's life. I didn't answer her. I didn't type an excuse. I didn't warn anyone. There was nothing left to say. That was the moment it finally clicked out. Words wouldn't fix this. Arguments wouldn't change it. And silence wasn't avoidance anymore. It was a boundary. The next morning arrived without drama. Sunlight slid through the kitchen window as if nothing had shifted overnight. I made coffee. I packed my son's lunch. We followed the same routine we always did. Then my phone rang. It was my parents' landlord. He sounded more confused than upset. He said the rent hadn't gone through and asked if there had been an error. I listened. Then I told him, calmly, that it was no longer my responsibility. No apology. No explanation. When the call ended, I sat there, surprised by how steady I felt. Later that morning, my brother called. We rarely talk, and when we do, it's usually short. This time WSN single quotes T. His voice was careful, tight. He asked what was happening. Said our parents were panicking. Said they told him I'd abandoned them. I didn't argue. Told him the truth. There was a long pause on the line. Then he said something I didn't expect. He'd been sending them money too. Not as much as I had, but enough. Groceries, gas, bills here and there. They had never told either of us about the other. As he spoke, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Responsibility split, information hidden, control maintained by isolation and guilt. This had never been just about me. When the call ended, something loosened in my chest. The weight I'd been carrying finally had a name. It wasn't failure. It was design. I didn't contact my parents after that. I didn't correct their version of events. I already knew what would come next. They wouldn't accept losing control. Quietly, they would reshape the story, reach outward, try to reclaim power through other people's eyes. I chose not to participate. That afternoon, I drove my son to school like always. We talked about small things, what he wanted for lunch, a project he was excited about. Outside, the world looked the same. Inside, everything had changed. The structure I'd lived inside for years had collapsed. The rules no longer applied, whatever came next. I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't standing where I used to be. The morning after I cut them off, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It started before sunrise. While the house was still wrapped in that thin, fragile quiet that exists before a day decides what it's going to be. I stood at the counter, coffee cooling in my hands. Watching the screen light up again and again. Missed calls. Voicemails. Numbers I hadn't seen in months. Outwardly, I stayed calm. I packed my son's lunch, reminded him to grab his jacket, nodded at the right moments. Inside, my chest felt tight, like something bracing for impact. They didn't call me. They went around me. By mid-morning, messages started coming in from relatives, people I barely spoke to anymore. Some asked if everything was okay. Some asked what happened. A few skipped the concern entirely and went straight to blame. I ignored them all. Then a friend sent me a link, a Facebook live stream. I didn't click it right away. I stared at the preview image instead. My parents sat side by side, framed carefully, faces solemn, eyes damp, composed, rehearsed. I knew that look. When I finally pressed play, I didn't look away. They spoke slowly, deliberately, said they had always supported me, said they had been generous and patient, said I was unstable, that I'd forced money on them, that I was punishing them. I watched without commenting. Then my father leaned forward slightly and said it again, clear, plain. My child did not exist to them. This time, it landed differently. Not sharper, heavier, because it wasn't private anymore. It was recorded, unedited, permanent. I closed the app and set my phone down. By afternoon, the video had spread. People argued in the comments. Some defended them. Others asked questions no one could answer away. I stayed silent. Later, the landlord called again. This time, his voice had changed. Formal, direct. The rent still hadn't come through. Notice was being issued. I thanked him and hung up. That's when it became clear. What started as a financial decision was turning into something else entirely. Structure that had protected them for years was collapsing, and no one was left to hold it up. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. That evening, I turned my phone off and took my son outside. We walked until the noise faded. I didn't explain anything. I didn't need to. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. Few days later, everything reached its conclusion without me there. There was a family gathering planned. Something casual. I didn't go. My parents showed up anyway. According to what I was told later, they spoke softly at first. Confused, hurt, abandoned. Then someone played the video. The same words, the same tone. No one argued. An older relative finally spoke calm, direct. She said anyone who could deny a child's existence didn't get to define family. My parents left shortly after. No one followed. By the end of the week, their social media vanished. Their names disappeared from community lists. Not because anyone attacked them, because no one defended them. I didn't celebrate. I focused on my son. One night, as I tucked him into bed, he asked about his grandparents. Not sad, just curious. I told him they wouldn't be coming around anymore. I didn't blame them. I didn't lie. I said, some people choose not to be part of our lives, and that's okay. He nodded, then asked if his uncle could come to his next birthday. That was it. Life quieted after that. The call stopped. The tension faded. Mornings came without reminders or transfers. The space they left wasn't empty. It was calm. I didn't wonder if I'd done the right thing. The answer showed up every morning at breakfast. I chose my child, and in doing that, I chose freedom. Silence settled in. At first, it felt unfamiliar, like stepping outside after a storm. Then the pressure tried to return. A voicemail from my ex-wife. Messages from mutual friends. When she finally called, I answered. She spoke carefully. Said my parents had contacted her. Questioned my stability. Told her the truth. There was a pause. Then she said she believed me. And just like that, another fear let go. The attempts continued. Through extended family. Old acquaintances. I didn't react. That was the hardest part. There were nights I lay awake, replaying conversations that never happened. Old instincts whispering guilt, but I didn't obey them. One night, my son said the house felt lighter. I told him sometimes when you stop letting people hurt you, things get quieter. He nodded. Asked for pancakes in the morning. That grounded me. Last thing arrived in the mail. A letter from my mother. No apology. Just expectation. If you want things to go back to normal, you know what to do. That's when I understood normal had never been safe. Normal had just been quiet. I put the letter away and closed the drawer. The next morning, as my son talked about his day, the decision settled not as fear, but resolve. This chapter didn't end with reconciliation. It ended with clarity. Peace isn't loud. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like not explaining yourself anymore. And sometimes it looks like a quiet house, a safe child, and the knowledge that no one else gets to price your peace. If this story sounds familiar, if you're questioning yourself or setting boundaries, hear this. Protecting your peace is not abandonment. Choosing your child is not betrayal. Silence that ends. Harm is not weakness. It's courage.